We're at American Clean Power in San Antonio, which is going to have about 8 to 10,000 people from the looks of it. So Rosemary's going to be a really, really big show. Welcome back to the Uptime podcast. I am your co-host, Alan Hall, here with Rosemary Barnes, all the way from Australia. And we also have Joel Saxum from Wind Power Lab.
Yeah, exciting. I came all this way, so
yes.
Be good.
In the 95-degree heat.
Yeah, what's with the heat? Yeah. I was not expecting this.
It's really hot in San Antonio this week. I don't know how we manage it, because it's the middle of May.
Yeah.
And it should be in the 80s, and it's 100 plus degrees right now.
It's high 30s for everybody out there who uses sensible temperature.
West Texas set records the last 2 weeks. The other weekend, it was the first or the earliest in the year they ever had triple-digit temperatures for 3 days in a row.
Wow.
So it's too hot.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I saw when I was just last week, it was the first time I looked at the forecast to see what clothes that I should have with me. And I saw that they're giving, over the weekend, they were giving requests for people to please, turn your thermostat up and, not use the aircon if you didn't need to, because they're worried about the grid already in May.
I think I read yesterday, ERCOT had 6 plants go offline.
Gas plants.
Yep.
You have to specify. Because
gas plants.
No matter what it is that happens, it's renewables that are going to get the blame.
Yes, this is true. Yeah, 6 gas plants had just kind of cascaded off.
Yeah.
Last week.
Yeah, and I think a coal one is still waiting to come back line after some maintenance as well. So,
Been week in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good week to have the conference.
It is.
What's happening?
So today's Monday. We're recording on the Monday before the conference. We are exhibiting on the show floor with Ping, so we had access to the floor. There are a lot of exhibitors at this conference. This is by far clearly the biggest conference in the United States, not even close. So Vestas, GE, all the big names are here. SkySpecs and all the drone companies are here. It's just everybody. The Danish consulate's here. It's a huge show. And I was surprised. I thought when we walked in today, it was going to be a little bit slow, just looking at the number of people on the outside, but it's 105, so you can't really tell because everybody's in the air conditioning. But when you walked in, there was just a massive amount of people, and that was just people registering. So I'm expecting, upwards of 8,000 people here this week, and I think that's good because we've had 2 years of really not seeing anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now we're finally back to the point of everybody seems pretty comfortable being around one another. There was hardly a mask on the floor. Sorry, Rosemary. There was hardly a mask on the floor. I don't know what happens in Australia, but this is Texas. so masks are really optional here for sure. And I saw people handshaking, which I thought was good. So the COVID is still spreading around the United States. It clearly is. But at least people are starting to get some sense of normalcy.
Yeah. I know last week Australia had the highest rate of positive tests in the world. So things aren't, I mean, my interpretation is it's because we haven't had a lot of it yet. It's all going to come now. But Australia is mostly moved away from masks, although I'm trying to think, the last conference I went to in Australia, probably maybe 10% of people were wearing masks. You didn't have to.
Wow.
And they didn't make you take a test before you got in. Here, there's a 2 hour long wait to get a COVID test before you're allowed inside. So, I think they're taking it seriously.
Yeah, the conference is definitely taking it seriously. And we have been to conferences in Texas. We were at the Blades conference. Joel and I were at the Blades conference and a couple months ago down in Austin.
March.
Was it March?
Or
February? Yeah, and there were no tests, no requirements at all. It was totally Texas. So, American Clean Power is trying to do their best because there's people coming from around the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one thing you could definitely see is there's people from all over. And that's a good thing for Texas, and it's a good thing for wind. So that's really good. And there's some couple of news stories this week that have popped up, and we want to talk about some of them. The big one right now is SkySpecs. So SkySpecs is a huge drone company in the United States and abroad. I don't know if they're down in Australia, Rosemary. I don't know if you know them
haven't
down there.
come across them down there, but it doesn't mean they're not there. I don't know everyone.
I know in Europe they're onshore, they're offshore. UK, all mainland Europe, everywhere you look, they've got some inspections going on.
So they're based in, Joel, correct me if I'm wrong, they're based in Michigan, right?
Yep, Ann Arbor, I think.
Okay, Ann Arbor, that's right. Yeah. So we've had Danny Ellis on the podcast. He's their CEO. He was one of our first podcast guests, probably 2 years ago now, when they were probably they're still fresh.
When they were an early startup.
right. They're Series A still, or pre-A. They may have been a pre-A, but now they had a $80 million investment from Goldman Sachs, and a number of other companies have invested into them. I think they're on Series E. So I don't know, Rosemary, if you had this stuff down in Australia.
We don't really have venture capital in Australia. we just dig things out of the ground and wait for property prices to go up. That's how you make money in Australia.
That's the venture capital.
You don't need any venture capital for that. Yeah, it's a real shame.
So there was a huge investment into SkySpecs, as SkySpecs is trying to transform itself from being a drone company into more of a automated inspection system.
I mean, they're adding in. I mean, a couple of years ago, they added in 2 other companies with some AI knowledge, and they've expanded their Horizons platform massively, right, to have more and more analytics capabilities. And I think you could probably see that from some of that from this $80 million influx of cash as well. What's next, right? Horizons is a great platform. Everybody you talk to says
they love it. It's good. It's a good platform.
So what kinds of what are they doing with it? What kinds of doing predictive maintenance, checking for defects? What sorts of?
Yeah, it was built on originally, much like most of the drone companies, that get a great AI to be able to classify defects and whatnot. But then it's like, okay, that's in the market. There's a lot of companies doing that now. What's the next step?
But are they doing it well? I'm just asking, trying to play devil's advocate because a lot of the work that I get pulled into with blade defects is because, it's like, oh, we did all our inspections, and then now all of a sudden, like a week after a drone inspection, this blade just literally snapped in half. What's going on? So
our repair campaign says it's going to be $10 million when it doesn't actually need to be. I'm not a SkySpecs customer, so I can't speak to the quality of the AI, but their growth says they're doing something right.
It's so needed, and especially when we go offshore. You can't just send people up constantly to check on
clean grease smudges and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I think obviously you have to have a lot of it for the AI to get better. So, but I'm interested to see. I don't know, figure out how they're measuring. If they're getting more accurate, that would be, maybe we should do a follow up interview and find out what's been going on the last couple of years.
Well, I think we'll probably see Danny on the floor and Tom Brady, who's our CFO, should be on the floor. Yeah, so we'll run across them at the show. One of the things in America about venture capital like this is when you see $80 million, and I think they have about $110 million invested into in total. Usually in those situations, the investors are looking for somewhere between a 5 and a 10x multiple. So they're saying that the company is, in theory, worth about $1 billion on the street, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, starting with we're a drone company,
right,
to growing, and I mean, they've scaled so much, right? They're all over the world doing these inspections. But inspections, as anybody that listens to the podcast that is an asset owner, they know where inspection prices are, right? You're not going to make $1 billion on $250 and $300 inspections. No. So what are the value adds that they can bring? And I see that this influx of cash, like I said, may spur on some further development, and what can we do with all this data we're collecting, and the possibilities there. So I see it good for the whole industry.
Yeah, it could be good. I think the weird part about it is, and rightly so, if you're in SkySpec's shoes and you see the economy starting to go south, the first thing you want to do is gather as much cash up as you can to give yourself runway, right? And so that gives them at least 24 to 36 months of capital to get through this downturn that's coming. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It just is unusual because I think some of the wind turbine companies themselves may not be valued that high. There's a lot of companies in wind.
Yeah, that don't have that kind of valuation. Yeah, absolutely.
GE is losing money right now, unfortunately, and we need GE. So it's weird to see a sort of a drone maintenance company valued more than an
they're-
OEM.
And they're just I'm not going to say just an inspection company because they do other things as well, right? But they don't actually go fix the blades or maintain brakes or anything
Not
like
yet,
that, right?
yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of those service companies. I would say the majority of service companies in the industry aren't valued at that.
Oh, that's true.
You know, and
Yeah,
and that's what has to keep the assets up and moving.
Well, one of the interesting things I saw this week about when that announcement was made was that SkySpecs has inspected, or I want to use the word controls, but probably is not the right term, but has inspected 45% of North America's wind turbines.
Yeah, and that equals what, 35,000 and change? Yeah, something like that.
Right. So you have 35,000 wind turbines at $10 each, $100 each, whatever that multiple is. I'm not sure how much it costs to do an inspection anymore.
Yeah,
Probably a couple $100.
Yeah, I mean, you can get them done $250 to $350, but depending on mob.
Okay. So yeah, you start doing those multiples, and that's not small. It's a decent amount of money. So there is a business there, and if they can get into more of the automated inspection, predictive, and Rosemary, you're totally right. I think if they get into predictive analysis, then the valuation really does get pushed up there quite a bit. But it's yet to be seen. So it's just one of those really weird stories to see in wind, because you just don't see a lot of venture capital happening in renewable energy like it should.
Yeah, when you do see it, you see it
when
being
you do
done
see it.
badly.
Well, yeah. So we were just talking about another company that's involved in renewable energy, which is one of Rosemary's favorites, is called Energy Vault. So Rosemary, you wanted to explain what Energy Vault is or was or wherever it is right now?
So Energy Vault, it's an energy storage company, and it's gravity storage, and they basically take heavy blocks and they winch it up, and then they do that when they've got too much electricity, so they use some electricity to raise the block up, and then when they want to generate electricity, they lower it down and get some electricity back that way. And I first became interested when I was thinking I'd been living in, I'd had one too many winters in Denmark. I was trying to move somewhere else in Europe, and I heard of this company in a beautiful, beautiful part of Switzerland working on energy storage. I was like, I'll go work there. So, and this was Energy Vault. So I looked into it, and I saw they had a little prototype. It's just like a crane set up with like a steel drum filled with concrete, and they had use that to demonstrate that you can, basically generate electricity in that way, which was not a surprise to anyone because, I mean, a lot of normal cranes have, some regenerative charging capabilities. So, I was a bit surprised that they felt like that was an important part of their design to test. They've been through another prototype, which I actually saw when I was on a mountain biking trip in the area one time. It's right near the border with Italy. It's just the most beautiful, beautiful place.
Okay.
Yeah.
What a weird place to do a demo, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's really funny actually because it's surrounded by mountains, and you're like, well, there's no better place to put in hydro, which is, the other kind of gravity storage. But of course, they envision it for places where you don't have any elevation difference to take advantage of. And so I got in touch with them because by then I'd started my YouTube channel, and I thought that would make a good episode for Engineering with Rosie. So I got in touch, and they said, great. We'd love for you to make a video. I said, fantastic. Can I have an interview? Yes, sure. I sent them through some example questions that I wanted to ask. And then, everyone's really busy at the moment. I can't get in touch. And it was just like really simple questions like, that their initial plan, they had these concrete blocks and they would just stack them up like I want to say like a Jenga tower, but a Jenga tower is quite stable because, like the blocks are long and they kind of interlock. And these ones, it was just more like if you just get those, like 2x2 Lego blocks and just stack them one on top of each other, it was more like that, but without the little knobs to lock it in. So one of my questions was, you're going to build a 100-meter tall tower just with concrete blocks stacked on top of each other.
Right.
How do you make sure that's not going to fall over and make sure that whatever
you don't kill somebody?
Whatever local council
there
is.
goes all the energy.
Right.
In a way you don't want. Yeah, and what local council is going to say, yeah, that's cool. We'll just let you build and rebuild these 100-meter tall buildings with no, reinforcement. What do you do when it's windy? Because they've got these blocks on cranes, and cranes don't operate when it's windy. So it was just really simple questions like that, and then they wouldn't answer. Then year or so later, when I was doing a live stream on gravity energy storage, I got in touch again. They have a new concept now. It doesn't look like the old one. Now it looks like a big warehouse with blocks on like racks. They go up and down.
Yes,
so I guess that gets rid of both of those, the wind problem and the other one. But, I just had some questions like, does this exist, or is it, beyond,
right.
I mean, I know that everything on the internet is just a computer rendering. And again, very enthusiastic to help me out until I sent them the list of questions. And then they're like, oh no, we can't actually share information now that we're publicly listed. And I thought,
right.
That sounds like contrary to my understanding of a publicly listed company where you have to share certain amounts of information.
Sure.
Yeah. So now, I mean, as you saw, so maybe you can explain what's happened now.
So they're embroiled in a class action lawsuit. So as the story goes, legal firm Hittleman Strunk has filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of investors due to alleged stock price inflation scheme. So this is all alleged at the moment. There's been no settlement of this, but the announcement that they made that they're accusing Energy Vault of paying a company called DG Fuels $1 million, and in return, DG Fuels agreed to buy over $500 million worth of Energy Vault products. So if you saw $500 million of potential purchases, that would really bolster your stock price.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's not a good game to play. So what the lawsuit says is that DG Fuels is just basically a shell company, has no revenue, and couldn't afford $500 million of anything. And that wasn't disclosed to the investors. So now as an investor, first of all, that's a securities law violation for
SEC
sure.
will come down.
SEC is going to hammer that if it is true. And then it's just going to take it, like we were talking earlier, I think it'll take the stock to zero, unfortunately, if the accusation is true. Even if it's not true, it's going to hurt their stock tremendously. So it's a big deal because we've had, there was a recent case down in Arkansas where there was basically a fraud case where a couple of guys were trying to sell wind turbines and then didn't actually have a company. They had this new wind turbine design. They got a lot of investors, and then
nothing.
Had nothing.
Yeah.
Right, and they ended up going to jail. So you just don't want to see that because you know that there is so much activity in renewables that there's going to be these fringe cases of bad actors, and that's not helpful to the industry.
Yeah, I agree. That's what annoys me about Energy Vault is that, there's a ton of other companies doing even very similar energy storage, gravity storage. There's Gravitricity, there's Eris in the US who have like a rail energy storage system, and there's others. And when I talk to their engineers, they're very forthcoming with the challenges that they've solved and the ones that remain and their timeframes and everything. Whereas Energy Vault are only interested in marketing and not anything else. When I've got in touch, and I haven't heard any different from other people working in engineering communication. And it frustrates me. This is the same with, there's some electric car companies as well that are, doing similar things. It's like you can draw a nice picture of a car, or you can draw a nice picture of an energy storage system, even animate it, any like first year engineering student can produce that
nice
in SolidWorks or something. Yeah, and then people go crazy for these technologies, and I really worry, one, that the money isn't going to the companies that need it. I mean, engineering, hardware, new technology development, it's a slow, expensive process. You need patient money in there, and if you try and do this alternative model where companies just focus on the marketing first and the product is like a secondary thing, I just worry it's going to,
destabilize.
Destabilize everything. Yeah.
In the renewable space, we're sometimes fighting an uphill battle against bad propaganda as well, right?
Mm.
Right.
And then you end up with, like you said, bad actors. It hit me with like a little bit of a light bulb in the head. As I read an article not too many weeks ago about there was a company, and they were in the Midwest, and it was solar roof panels. And they were coming through saying, like, we can install this, we can install that. Your bill will go to zero, and then they come and install it, and then when their bill's not going to zero or they're saving $5 a bill, then people start calling, what's going on here? And then they do investigations. The general public doesn't see that, like, you should have your solar panels on the south-facing roof of your house, and they're installed on the north side, and then they're like, oh, cut the trees next to your house and you'll get it then. And it was what ended. There's a big class action lawsuit going on against the company. And I can't remember what it was, but it was because they had basically bamboozled people by promising them the world and then just taking their money and running with it, right? So it's that uphill battle that we already have to fight in the renewables industry.
Right.
It's such a pain that something else is going on like that.
Yeah, and especially at the ACP this week, one of the things I'm interested in walking around and seeing, and Rosemary, you probably walk around too. I know, Joel, you're going to be doing a lot of legwork this week, is just see where all the new tech is, right? And hopefully we see some good new tech out there because we need some good positive feelings in renewables. And I feel like we're at a little bit of a lull, weirdly enough. After coming out of the pandemic, it feels like we should be going, and we're just kind of getting started. So hopefully we'll see something this week.
Yeah, well, I've got a media pass for this conference, which I'm really. Of
course.
Here we go. Okay.
This is my first one. It was your suggestion to try and get it. I didn't.
It was a good idea. Yeah. I'm not saying it's not a good idea. Actually, it was a good idea. I'm just.
But aside from saving the money on the pass, the really cool thing is that my name must be on a list of media, and so companies have been getting in touch with me, and they're nearly all energy storage companies. So,
really?
Yeah. So I don't know if that's because I've been covering it a bit recently on the channel, but lots. I mean, some of them not so exciting in terms of new technology.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the energy transition is about the less exciting things, like we have already got batteries and we've already got solar panels.
That's
and,
true.
And wind turbines. And so it is a lot about combining them and using them in the best way. So yeah, I'm excited to see what's in there on energy storage.
Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break right here. And when we come back, we have a couple of techie stories that,
Ping Monitor is a continuous blade monitoring system which allows wind farm operators to stay ahead of maintenance. Wind techs can often hear damaged blades from the ground, but they can't continuously monitor all the turbines. They also can't calculate how bad the damage is or how fast it's propagating based on sound, but Ping can. Ping's acoustic system is being used on over 600 turbines worldwide. It allows operators to discover damage before it gets expensive and prioritize maintenance needs across their fleet, and it pays for itself the first time it identifies serious damage or saves you from doing an unnecessary visual inspection. Stop flying blind out there. Get Ping's ears on your turbines. Learn more at pingmonitor.co.
we're going to dive into. So we'll be right back after this short break. Well, welcome back. This is the Uptime podcast, and we have Rosemary in the United States, hard to believe. And Rosemary, I thought we had a prohibition there for a while because you couldn't come to the States or wouldn't come to the States, or COVID was the reason.
We weren't allowed out of Australia.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
The Australian government. It wasn't even the American government, which would be totally fine with being upset with. But no, it's your own government keeping you locked in country.
Yeah. It was really hard for me to get into Australia when I was trying to get back from Denmark, and then it was impossible to leave once. I knew that once I went, then I wouldn't be able to leave again, which is a pretty weird situation. That's over now.
So I guess since we said the word COVID, we're going to get flagged by YouTube, but at this point, screw it. So I mean, one of the things about, now that you're actually here in America, and one of the things that we always saw about Australia was you guys were locked down and police were out in the streets and keeping people off the streets. And maybe that's a Western Australia phenomenon, but that's what we saw in the U.S. press here.
It happened a little bit, but for the most part, because they had hard lockdowns, there wasn't a lot of lockdown. So
okay,
for the most part, and definitely not Western Australia. Western Australia like really carefully locked their borders down, which is their dream in any sort of time.
Yeah.
They've got a bit of a Texas vibe about them. They want to do their own thing, and good on them.
I don't know what that means, but okay.
And they did it very successfully, and they had, I don't know if you added up all the lockdown they had, it was minimal, absolutely minimal in Western Australia. Beyond the first one at the very start of the pandemic, they were basically free. So when it works, it works. But then now you see, what's happening in China is a certain point where you have to realize that it's not worth it anymore. And, as we got the new variants that were just so much more contagious, nowhere in Australia is trying to maintain COVID zero anymore. So
well, good.
Yeah.
Well, because we're pleased to have you in America, and you've traveled around the world a little bit here. We won't discuss where, but it seems like are the travel restrictions pretty much free in sort of the Western Hemisphere? Or?
I was in So on this trip, I came through Costa Rica and Mexico on the way here. That's why I'm looking a bit more brown. You might be able to tell.
Isn't it sunny in Australia? It's not more sunny in Costa Rica, is it?
We've had just the worst summer in Australia. It's been, it's over now, but it's a La Nina year, which means we get a lot of water, and we just had floods, like
Oh, wow, okay.
1 in 500 year flood after 1 in 500 year flood. It's been relentless. Not where I live. It's 600 meters above sea level and in some rolling hills in Canberra, so we don't have floods up there. But a lot of northern New South Wales and Queensland is having really, really shocking time. And it's happening more and more often. Like there's people whose houses were washed away in the floods, like 4 or 5 years ago, that rebuilt and lost their home again. And so, it's a big topic of conversation. About how much more we can expect these sort of things to happen, and like whether you should rebuild the same every time now, and what climate statistics to use for your planning.
Right, sure.
You used to use the past as a guide for what a 1 in 500 year flood might look like and where you should build a town, and now it's kind of becoming clear that doesn't make sense, but what's the better option? Just invent. No one really knows exactly how things are going to work out.
There's a reevaluation somewhere that needs to happen.
Yeah, definitely. It's not been, anyway, in summary, it's not been a great summer in Australia. We didn't see a lot of sun out on the east side anyway. In Costa Rica it was very hot and humid, and people are still wearing masks around most places there.
Really?
Yeah, and in Mexico, very hot, not nearly as humid, and no masks anywhere except for when I went in to get my COVID test. Then I had to wear a mask, and in the airport. Yeah.
In the airport, sure.
Airports everywhere. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's well. At least so. I guess in some part of the world we're starting to lighten up a little bit, and some parts are still kind of in lockdown. China obviously been in some sort of really restrictive lockdown, at least parts of it. I didn't know if that also kind of flowed down to Australia, but it doesn't sound like that is at all.
No, it's too. Okay. You can't go back once. Yeah,
I'm with you.
Yeah,
we kind of need to move forward.
Yeah.
So one of the things about Australia that I saw, Orsted is going to create coral reefs with their wind turbine bases. Like they're going to just like green light it and like, all right, fish, whatever, have at it. These bases are yours. Which is unusual because there's always been a little bit of concern about that, about whether it should make the bases. And I know we have talked about that a couple of times, but it just seems so odd because, Australia has done a really good job on its coral reefs and also in terms of the ecology, like they're paying a lot of attention to it. I watch Finding Nemo. I've seen movies.
Yeah, that's a good Great Barrier Reef documentary.
Yeah.
I do love that film, especially the seagulls. They got that just right. The government's been doing pretty badly with the Great Barrier Reef. At least they're having a fight about whether it should be listed as threatened or not. They have solved some big problems. There was a big problem with agricultural runoff, chemicals causing problems, and they have really done a lot of work to get that under control. So that deserves credit for the government and all the farmers involved who have worked to improve that. But we still do see coral bleaching event after coral bleaching event, and the federal government won't do anything much about climate change, which is the most important thing. And then, they'll do things like announce large amounts of money to be spent saving the reef. It turns out that, the money's gone to some company that has one employee, it's got 500 million, or I don't remember the exact number, but a lot of money to deal with. And I just saw on Twitter, I didn't get a chance to look at the details, but apparently one of the big projects that the, reef preservation money is going towards is developing heat-resistant coral strains. That's not the point. That's not preservation. That's not the point. We have a Great Barrier Reef with coral in it. Like, we can't just write that off and start again with a new designer kind of coral. Like, no, it's not okay with me.
What's the big offshore wind farm that's going to start in Australia?
They're all way further south. Yeah,
much further south.
Yeah, so there aren't many plans that I've seen to put offshore wind up around the Barrier Reef, because that's all in northern Queensland.
Right.
So like quite far up. There are if you look at a map that shows where people are kind of interested, there are some around kind of close. But in general, the barrier reef is, it's a World Heritage Site. And you shouldn't do anything with it, but it doesn't stop people trying to, dredge it to put in a new coal export port and stuff like that. So,
Okay.
I think that the report that came out about Block Island being good for the fish habitat. Right. So that's a passive thing, right? So you have jackets and foundations out there, and it's great for the fish around it. But my mind goes to, and I think it's fantastic what Orsted is trying to do to rebuild some of the coral reefs and see if we can use this for something else. But my past of offshore oil and gas makes me think we spent millions of dollars removing barnacles and growth and all this stuff from all of the subsea assets because it may affect their durability. It may affect that coral might eat into a coating, and then once the coating is gone on a jacket, then you're into the metal. Then you have issues with there's engineering issues there, corrosion, and all these different things. So there's the oil and gas companies for the last 50, 60 years offshore have been fighting marine growth on there. So now we're switching gears and going, let's try it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think it's a great idea, but I don't know. I'm not an engineer in Orsted's back office, so I don't know if they've.
So what is their plan? What's Orsted plan? They're going to put some it's calcium, right?
There's some larvae larvae that can grow, right? And they grow. Of course,
you can seed it basically.
Yeah. So they're basically seeding. Right now, what I think the plan is they're going to have people, some really brave rope access technicians, in the surf zone, putting this stuff on. And then hopefully it takes place. And they're doing it in Taiwan, so the waters are warm and whatnot. So, really cool. I think coral reefs don't grow that well in the North Sea. So
no.
it's good that they're doing it down in Taiwan. But we'll see what happens.
But even it seems like anywhere we drop old ships, pylons, anything into the ocean, there has been a boon for fish. I think a couple of weeks ago we were talking about this, and I decided to look up where are the fish? There's a huge, vast ocean, and most of the fish are near the shorelines, right? That they're not in the middle of the ocean because there's a tendency to think, the fish are everywhere. That's not the case. And so anywhere there's sort of life, is where fish will propagate, and then you kind of create this ecosystem to the point of, I don't know if you saw the latest news from the ocean cleanup. Have you guys followed the ocean cleanup where in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? Is that the right terminology? So there's a concern. There was an article written in the New York Times. I think it's in the New York Times saying if they pull that plastic out of the ocean, they may change the ecology of all the sea life around it, and it may destroy that sea life. And the people at Ocean Cleanup were like, "You got to be kidding me, right?" Right. So
it's false. It's a false ecosystem.
Right. It's an ecosystem it's sort of based on having plastic out there. That's not healthy either. So there's just this weird balance between the ecology and society.
And also another factor is climate change. I'm pretty sure in what I've seen of that, you do better to just leave the plastic there than to drive out there in a fossil fuel powered ship. I think it uses a lot of fuel to catch not that much plastic, and plastic that's
capturing tons of it.
Yeah, but the plastic that's just sitting there. So that's why I say you got to, from the climate point of view, plastic that's just sitting there is, that's a carbon store. That's storing. That's carbon capture and use. Your big plastic garbage patch. So it's all these competing things. It's a really interesting kind of as an environmentalist, it's hard to know where to fall on that issue because it's doing harm to some things that I care about and helping some things that I care about. So it's
it's not a single variable problem.
No.
Right. You get to look at it that way. There's multi-variables. I think the reason that they started the ocean cleanup was because they were detecting microplastic in
everywhere.
fish, everywhere.
Yeah, they're in people too.
That sounds like a PhD project for someone.
Yeah, I'm sure.
The viability of it.
Yeah.
Speaking of in the spirit of our location, we're in San Antonio here. We're close to the Gulf of Mexico. Right. There's a ton of fishermen all along the Gulf of Mexico that will tell you the best place to fish, run 40 miles out and fish on the platform.
Oh, sure.
That's where they catch all the reds. That's where all the fish are, right? So that's what the guys do here. So, and I talked to a friend of mine that fishes every weekend. He said, I don't need a study on Block Island to tell you that jacket is where the fish are going to be. He said, I can tell you that every weekend. He said, you can come to my house on Sundays and have dinner.
So I guess there's that's a really good point, Rosemary. I hadn't, remember that the ocean cleanup when they first started, say this about them, is that it was not ship powered. Right, the whole goal of that system was to be just kind of free floating, wind powered, and then they got into an issue where it just wouldn't collect consistently, and they needed to bring the ships in. So there's still a possibility. I think they're still looking at that as being just let the winds move it where it will. But I think that's fair. I'm not sure. I'm super worried about the ships burning some diesel for the time being.
I'm more interested in what they're doing in the rivers to stop the garbage getting out there. To me, I think that's the much more impactful thing to do.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
So I think you're right about that, is that they were going after 1,000 rivers. They were going to try to, one of them outside Philadelphia, of all places, right? So they're going to go after 1,000 rivers, which are the leading contributors to the plastic coming into the ocean. So there maybe are, between those two things, they're going to dramatically change what's happening in the ocean. And just like Orsted's trying to do, they're trying to have a positive effect in the ocean. It may work out, it may not. Just something to keep an eye on. So we're going to take a quick break right here, and when we come back, we'll have some more Uptime.
Lightning is an act of God, but lightning damage is not. Actually, it's very predictable and very preventable. Strike Tape is a lightning protection system upgrade for wind turbines made by WeatherGuard. It dramatically improves the effectiveness of the factory LPS so you can stop worrying about lightning damage. Visit weatherguardwind.com to learn more, read a case study, and schedule a call today.
Uptime news, and we'll see you after the break. Welcome back to the Uptime podcast. We are here in San Antonio, and one of the big news stories of the last week has been that on the offshore leases. There's been a lot of offshore leases in the United States. Some of them off the East Coast have went for $4 billion, one particular sale. And Joel, there was another sale just recently down in North Carolina?
North or south, I couldn't remember which one, but about $300 million in total,
So these offshore leases are huge in terms of the amount of money that is going into a plot of ocean.
The rights for it.
Just for the rights,
right? Just for the rights.
As we had Kevin Ewing on, Rosemary, you weren't on that episode, but Rosemary, we had Kevin Ewing on, who is an attorney involved with these leases, and that was a really good episode. And I've watched that episode a couple of times because there's so much in that episode. But what Kevin Ewing was saying was, it's a competitive bid to allow you to then progress down the pathway of possibly maybe having some wind turbines in the ocean. There's a lot of hurdles to get through, and I know we've seen that with Vineyard Wind. It's had some struggles there. The amount of money that people are paying for these offshore leases to me, seems like a huge risk. That all it takes is one election, and you could be in a lot of trouble. Not to say that the legal framework wouldn't protect you, but particular politicians could really slow you down, I think.
And it's a lot of money to make up. I worry about the cost of the electricity that's going to come out of these wind farms, because they've got a high starting point.
They do.
It's a lot of faith in a lot of things, I think, and one of them is this conversation I've had with a few colleagues is we still don't have a supply chain in the U.S. for offshore wind.
We have zero.
Like, people are diligently working on it, right? There's different ports and some quayside facilities, and people have plans to develop them,
right.
But a lot of parts still coming from overseas, and then you have the Jones Act stuff. Like, there's so many variables to throw $4 billion at the chance to develop something, right? It'd be like buying a piece of land and saying, like, you might be able to build a house on it, you might not. So
it's a piece of real estate. You're buying a piece of real estate.
Basically, the rights to try to do something.
Which is just a little foreign to us because we're not involved in that industry too much, but. So Eversource, which is a large energy provider up in the Northeast, has had a partnership, or does have a partnership with Orsted, to develop 3 different sites. And they also has some, so they were involved in South Fork and a couple of others, wind projects that are in process. And then they have another lease there, of not a huge one, but it's a decent sized lease. So what's happening now is Eversource is realizing that has a lot of value. All those projects have a lot of book value. And because the market is so hot, that they're thinking about selling. So they own about 50% of this development. So it's a joint partnership with Orsted. And the head of Eversource is saying, I'll quote it here, in light of the record-setting prices, Joel, here you go. Yeah. In light of the record-setting prices in the recent federal lease auction for tracks around the New York Bight and the evolving landscape, we're conducting a fulsome review of our interest in the joint venture with Orsted to assess alternatives that will allow us to create shareholder value and continue building a leading clean energy company that is wholly supportive of our region's climate change goals. Joe Nolan, the Eversource president, said. So that's a lot of words to say. There's a lot of value in this holding that we have. Maybe we ought to load it.
Yeah, maybe we flip it.
Maybe we flip it.
And we don't know what the ideas behind plans are, right? They do a review. So here's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. When we're talking about permitting and the supply chain and all these different things that get in place, before First Energy comes out of that wind farm, say South Fork or Resolution, Sunrise, whichever they're in, before First Energy comes out there, are we looking at 2026?
I think South Fork is getting close. I mean, they're putting cable in the streets in the Hamptons, which is a big problem. Okay. So it's getting fairly close.
But I mean, like this offshore thing with Orsted, there's a lot. There's 500.
There's risk.
There's 500. Say I don't know exactly what the value is, but say we'll say 100 million just for play's sake.
Sure.
If there's $100 million worth of Eversource's capital tied up in their investment with Orsted, that's $100 million of the capital that they may be able to put into somewhere where they get clean energy to market faster tomorrow or the next day or 6 months.
Maybe more easily, because when I look at these projects, they've got the right to have this space of ocean.
Right.
There's so much work to do.
To be done,
It's not just risky. It's, it's hard. Have they got the staff? It's hard to get the right people at the moment. It's hard to get all the materials that you need. It's hard to get the permits that you need. All sounds very hard, and just flipping. Just flipping this bit of paper, that sounds very easy. So I can kind of get behind it on that basis.
And the capital turnaround might be more advantageous for them. And like I said, who knows? Maybe they're putting a plan together to put more clean energy into the grid quicker.
Yeah. I'm up in the Northeast right now. There's a ton of solar projects going on. So I'm imagining that's where they're going to go. Is they're going to push more solar projects. Who could really say? And the crossroads what's happening now in the States, Rosemary, is like New York is turning off all its nuclear plants. And California was supposed to turn off its nuclear plants. And now they're sort of reconsidering. California in particular is reconsidering that. There has to be some sort of balance. And I'm wondering if they're looking at the portfolio saying it may not be as balanced as it needs to be for the energy demands in the Northeast. The Northeast is a huge energy source. Right. You got Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. You got these massive.
Look at the nighttime maps of the Northeast part of the U.S. It just glows. You don't get to see stars as well there as you do in Texas.
Right. So there is a big draw there, and I'm not sure if they're trying to push a renewable future, which they clearly said they are doing, how they're going to power that. And I'm wondering if they're trying to change the mix. Hydro is one of those things they're probably involved in. Nuclear, it seems like it'd be back on the table again just because of the variable wind and solar sources. Who knows? But there is probably, you're probably right, Joel. There's probably $1 billion worth of value sitting there on the table that they could sell today for the right buyer.
Yeah, and presumably whoever buys it is going to develop these projects.
Otherwise, the projects
what do they want
go
to
forward.
pay the money for? So
we'll
still end up with that wind energy. That we
I would imagine that somewhere in the belly of Orsted's contract writers, that they get first right of refusal on this thing.
Surely.
So it'll still go. And Orsted, world-class team for developing offshore wind.
Unbelievable.
The best of the best. So that'll still go forward. It's just maybe there's some more capital that gets allocated somewhere else in the Northeast, and it's good for everybody.
Well, that brings up the other half of this equation, right, which is Orsted. Orsted right now has been steadfastly marching forward with renewables. And they have not really backed out of any project.
No.
And we've seen a lot of other companies sort of hedge their bets or slow down projects. Orsted still seems to be going full steam ahead. And that's remarkable because of just the economic conditions they're in. They do not seem to be fluctuating at all in their drive for more renewables.
Like if you want to listen to a fantastic leader speak, Mads Nipper, anything that he puts out, that was a change over a year ago or so. The company's just been moving forward, and cool project. Like we talked earlier in the episode about the thing in Taiwan. Like they're moving, they're setting the bar.
They really are, and I guess that's good because you're going to need stability there. And as we're at ACP this week, we're going to be hearing a lot more about what some of these operators are up to. And we'll talk about it when we're out on the show floor this week. Hopefully, we'll have a number of people to talk to about renewables and what they're working on. But there has to be some balance here, right? And I'm just not sure where that balance line is. And if it's going to be a really odd show. I think it's going to be a really odd show because when we come back to next year's, and next year's is in New Orleans.
I really want to go to New Orleans. So
okay.
I don't know
about a place that floods a lot. That's it.
We're there in the winter, so it's better.
For the music, do they have just a crazy jazz scene there?
Oh, yeah.
They do.
Yeah. So I'm keen to come back. I don't know if I can justify 2 years in a row, but
Minneapolis is the year after.
No, it's not. Are you serious? Why are we in Minneapolis?
Well, at least it's May and not February.
There's still snow on the ground in Minneapolis in May.
That's true.
Why are we not in Vegas?
I've been to Vegas. I love Vegas.
We got to get on some committees.
Well, evidently so, because I don't know anything Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Minnesota is fine, but in like July, it's great. I'm not sure about
when the
May.
mosquitoes come out.
Right,
Yeah.
That's true. But yeah, so next year, we're going to get the lay of the land here. And then next year in New Orleans, you're going to wonder what's new, who's here, who's not, how much the landscape has changed. U.S. is in a really odd place of being in recession and then having crazy amount of inflation.
Yeah.
Some of these companies we see here this week are not going to be here a year from now.
You know, one of the cool things I've seen talking within my network as well is a few more solar operators coming here this year.
I have seen solar operators. Yeah.
So that's, I mean, there's a lot of big companies that do both, right? But to see some specific solar service companies and some other things like that starting to get in more into the ACP spirit of things.
Well, that was the point of ACP, right?
Yeah,
Because it was
I think it's
American
great.
Wind Energy Association, now went to ACP, so it covers all renewables.
Yep.
Smart move.
And the
ACP
hot
's
topic,
part.
like we were talking about earlier, hot topic that I'm hearing as well is storage. Whether it's batteries, whether it's cool innovation projects, someone trying to do something, a lot of battery stuff.
A lot of battery stuff.
And there's not really from my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, a huge precedence set for how it's installed, what kind of safety things are around it, and all that stuff. So that's a developing trend as well, and we'll see where that goes. Hopefully there'll be some cool information around that too.
Yeah, I think we need it soon because, I mean, up until now, for household batteries at least, it really, the economics didn't stack up. You kind of, you would take as long to pay back your investment as the battery warranty was.
Right.
So it's tipped into positive territory now for, your expected return on your investment, but it's still not like super attractive. But I think in the next 2 or 3 years it will be, and then we need to make sure that it gets rolled out right. Because I think it's really interesting to compare solar in Australia compared to the US. In Australia, it's super cheap. Just everybody has solar panels on their roof just purely for the economics and not necessarily much else. And in the US, it's much, much, much more expensive, rooftop solar here.
Yeah.
And my understanding is the main difference is the soft costs. So, for installation, but also for, permitting and all these sorts of things. Insurance, right?
Yeah.
So I know early on in Australia, I think it was a conservative government, but one of the very, very few good things that they did for the energy transition was that they really worked to standardize the process, and they standardized all the training and certification and everything. And so it's just simple. In most cases, I think you only need one visit of someone to physically come to your roof. Everything else they can do remotely, and when they go there, it's to, install it, and then it works in the way it's expected. It's not like that story you're talking about where people get these shocks that they've been,
taken
lied
basically.
to.
Yeah.
So there's no reason why you can't do that for batteries as well. And I think that the key part is going to be coordinating the use of them as well. Because at the moment, with feed-in tariffs, it's usually just a flat rate. And so, you're making solar energy and you're selling it back to the grid at whatever rate, but you're not necessarily selling it to the grid when the grid needs electricity.
Right.
And so when you have batteries involved, there's a possibility to really, help the grid. So, we saw over the weekend, we had requests to voluntarily reduce the amount of energy that we were using to help the grid. Well, that's actually really valuable when people will do that. And if you can, get a lot of homes with batteries or with, electric vehicles plugged into the grid, it's hugely valuable if you can coordinate that and, have them selling electricity back to the grid when you've got this real pressure. So
Well,
it'll be interesting to see how well we can coordinate it.
I know Ford in the U.S., of course, their Lightning pickup it's exceeding everything that they said in marketing.
Everybody loves it. Yeah,
they're
it's
saying
crazy.
like, oh, we were supposed to get 300 miles of range. We're getting 425.
It's
like,
really positive.
but they've put out a system where now it's like, it's $3,595, $3,600 from the factory or from the dealership when you buy your truck. Boom, they'll come and install the battery, maintainer, and the V2X basically system for you at a flat rate.
Yep.
And I think that getting the support from a major entity such as Ford to bring that to the market, that should get more airtime. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
And we're not very far from where Tesla is.
Yeah.
So we're about an hour and a half from the new Cybertruck factory, and I think they're making the Model 3 down there. There's we have a Tesla insider, by the way, over here. So you think that Texas having so much, well, they're the leader in wind,
Yeah,
right?
24.3% of wind in the U.S. is created in Texas.
And then the batteries are going to be made here, and then the electric cars are going to be made here, and the electric trucks are going to be made in here, and we're going to launch people to Mars from Texas.
Texas is open for business.
This is crazy right now. What's happening to Texas? The roads are unbelievably busy.
Yeah.
Crazy busy. So the battery piece may happen in Texas. They may figure out a lot of those pieces
I think
here in Texas.
actually the electricity market is set up better for it in Texas.
It is,
It's,
because
it's quite similar to
separate.
Australia, where it really is a lot about the market figuring out what's the the cheapest way to supply electricity. And I think it's why you see, like, you wouldn't expect Texas to be this really progressive, climate change loving state, but they are
If it makes money.
leading.
If it makes money.
And
If
the
it makes
same
money.
with Australia. Like Australians care about climate change, but we haven't voted that way, and so the federal government is so antagonistic. Even you'd say, at least definitely not helpful. And yet, the rate of installation in Australia is the fastest in the world now. So
when you look at permitting in Texas, there's so many things here that make wind energy easy. Right? Large tracts of landowners. You go out in West Texas, and there might be a landowner that owns 20,000 acres of private land. Okay, you just have to sign one guy up.
Yeah.
Or one family, you know what I mean?
It's easier.
That's easy enough, right? So then you have just a couple other sanctioning bodies, and ERCOT is here, right? The grid is just one small
grid.
Yeah, so it's a lot easier to make moves in a state that, and then of course, economically, it's easier to get workers here. No state income tax, right?
Oh,
So
that's nice.
yeah, yeah.
Nice if you got to pay tax.
Yeah.
Not nice if you want to use tax money. But.
Yeah, so I mean, the advantages to doing, and I'm not normally Texas, but the advantages of doing business here are huge. I mean, you see all the major. I mean, Houston is the energy capital of the world, and now being touted as the energy transition capital of the world.
Right.
Where they're using all those really smart oil and gas engineers to further renewable projects.
Yeah.
So a lot of things happen in Texas.
That's one of the hot places for the podcast is Houston, Texas. You wouldn't think that in a wind energy podcast, but one of the hottest spots in America where people listen the most is Houston, Texas.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Would you have guessed that? I didn't guess that.
No, I don't know.
I thought, Houston? What's up with Houston? But it is a renewable.
Well, you get people like
energy.
myself. I was an oil and gas guy in Houston and transitioned into the renewables side of the business. So there's a lot of, I just would put a big umbrella over everybody, call them energy professionals now instead of oil and gas or renewables or whatever, because you have the background of both. And it gives a better, more rounded person in the industry. And there's tons of them. Tons of people coming over to the renewable side.
Yeah. Texas is busy. And that's good. So I think we're going to call it here. Thanks, Rosemary, for being in America. And it's good to see you in person. Thanks, Joel, for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
We're going to wrap it up here. So if you're watching on YouTube, you should check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever your audio listening platform is. If you're listening to us on Apple, one of the audio platforms, you should check us out on YouTube. And while you're there, you should look up Engineering with Rosie, because she has a great engineering channel. She has a lot about renewable energy, and that channel is exploding, so you can just join in on the fun there. So we will see you next week on the Uptime Podcast.